That was it. That's my favourite sort of memory of that song. I mean, talk about a compliment.
Paul McCartney, with his work in the Beatles and his long solo career, is one of the greatest songwriters of all time. He is a largely self-taught musician, and his approach was described by musicologist Ian MacDonald as, by nature drawn to music's formal aspects, yet wholly untutored. He produced technically finished work almost entirely by instinct, his harmonic judgment based mainly on perfect pitch and an acute pair of ears. A creator of tunes capable of existing apart from their harmony, McCartney likened his approach to the primitive cave artists who drew without training. But where did this approach come from? What were his influences? What can this tell us about our own songwriting? And what's this got to do with Jimi Hendrix? Born in 1942, Paul McCartney grew up in Liverpool, a city in the northwest of England. Arguably, McCartney's first musical influence was his dad.
My dad was the musician who would play at the family parties. So he was the music in the house. We had a piano, like a lot of people in that era. And so I would listen to all his music, and it would just go in me.
Paul's dad, Jim, was born in Everton in 1902. While at school, he worked in a music hall as a lamp boy. This would become an inspirational environment for him. The family had an old second-hand piano, which they had been given. As an aside, this was from the North End Music Store, which was run by Harry Epstein. Harry's son, Brian Epstein, would later go on to manage the Beatles. The piano was installed in the McCartney's parlour, and Jim taught himself to play, pounding out tunes he had heard the night before at the music hall.
My dad was a pianist, an amateur pianist, so he played our piano.
What type of music did he play?
He would play Chicago, Chicago.
Like show tunes?
Yeah. He played at home, so it was lovely hearing someone play piano at home. But his main thing was New Year's Eve, big family party. And he would get on the piano and just play all evening. There was no...
Play and sing too, or just play?
No, he would just play, and then everyone else would sing.
I see.
It was a sing-along.
Interestingly, this McCartney interest in music extended back at least one more generation. Joe McCartney, Jim's father and Paul's grandfather, was a traditionalist who liked opera and played the E-flat tuba in the local territorial army band. He also played the double bass at home, sang, and hoped to interest his children in music. Jim learned how to play the trumpet and piano by ear, and at the age of 17 started playing ragtime music. Joe McCartney thought that ragtime, the most popular music of the period, was tin can music. This ability and perseverance to play by ear seems to be something of a family trait in the McCartneys. It goes to show how we are all shaped by how and where we grew up. Paul said of his father, "My dad was a pianist by ear and then a trumpeter until his teeth gave out. He was a good pianist, you know, but he would never teach me because he felt that you should learn properly. It was a bit of a drag because a lot of people have said that I do chords a lot like he used to do. I'm sure I picked it up over the years." At another time he commented, "Dad used to play the cornet a lot, just for fun at home. This was my earliest musical influence at, say, the age of 5. Jim had a collection of old 78 RPM records that he would often play, or perform his musical party pieces, the hits of the time, on the piano. He used to point out the different instruments in songs on the radio to his sons, and took them to local brass band concerts. Jim also taught them a basic idea of harmony between instruments, and Paul credits Jim's tuition as being helpful when later singing harmonies with John Lennon. With encouragement from Jim, Paul started playing the family piano and wrote When I'm 64 on it. Jim advised Paul to take some music lessons, which he did, but soon realised that he preferred to learn by ear as his father had done. After Paul and his brother Michael became interested in music, Jim connected the radio in the living room to extension cords connected to 2 pairs of Bakelite headphones, so that they could listen to Radio Luxembourg at night when they were in bed. Radio Luxembourg was an English language commercial radio station that was broadcast from the country of Luxembourg. Its primary audience was people in the UK who were unable to access radio stations that weren't run by the BBC until 1973. During the 1950s and 60s, it began to focus more on the teenage audience, with an emphasis on pop music from the UK and USA. But being self-taught was not the only thing that influenced McCartney's songwriting. After the death of his mum Mary, McCartney received a nickel-plated trumpet from his father for his 14th birthday. But when rock and roll and skiffle became popular on Radio Luxembourg, McCartney traded it in for a £15 acoustic guitar, since he wanted wanted to be able to sing while playing. Paul also played his father's Framer's Spanish guitar when writing early songs with Lennon. Paul found it difficult to play guitar right-handed, but after noticing a poster advertising a Slim Whitman concert and realising that Whitman played left-handed, he reversed the order of the strings on his own guitar. Slim Whitman was an American country music singer-songwriter and guitarist known for his yodeling abilities and his use of falsetto. He had a career that spanned over 7 decades and consisted of a prolific output of over 100 albums and around 500 recorded songs that not only consisted of country music but also of contemporary gospel, Broadway show tunes, love songs and standards. As a child, Slim Whitman became infatuated with music and learned to yodel listening to Montana Slim and Jimmy Rogers records. At age 17, he married 15-year-old Geraldine Christ, a preacher's daughter. The newlyweds moved to a 40-acre farm south of Jacksonville, Florida, where Whitman worked as a meat packer. While working in the plant, he suffered an accident and lost almost all of the second finger on his left hand. After the accident, he began working in a Tampa shipyard. During World War II, Whitman served in the US Navy, where he learned to play guitar. Despite being right-handed, Slim taught himself to play left-handed due to his injuries. It could be argued, therefore, that an accident in a meatpacking plant in Florida influenced the trademark sound of the bass in the Beatles. Do you know any interesting songwriting connections? If so, let me know in the comments below. Another of the most famous self-taught left-handed songwriters is Jimi Hendrix. Jimi was born Johnny Allen Hendrix in Seattle in 1942. In 1957, while helping his father with a side job, Hendrix found a ukulele amongst the garbage that they were removing from an older woman's home. She told him that he could keep the instrument, which had only one string. Learning by ear, he played single notes, following along to Elvis Presley songs, particularly Hound Dog. In 1958, at age 15, Hendrix acquired his first acoustic guitar for $5. He played for hours daily, watching others and learning from more experienced guitarists, and listening to blues artists such as Muddy Waters, B.B. King, Howlin' Wolf and Robert Johnson. In 1959, attending a concert by Hank Ballard and the Midnighters in Seattle, Hendrix met the group's guitarist Billy Davis. Davis showed him some guitar licks and got him a short gig with the Midnighters. Soon after he acquired the acoustic guitar, Hendrix formed his first band, the Velvetones. Without an electric guitar, he could barely be heard over the sound of the group. After about 3 months, he realised that he needed an electric guitar. In mid-1959, his father relented and bought him a white Supro Ozark. Because Hendrix was a left-handed guitarist playing a right-handed guitar strung for a lefty, the guitar responded slightly differently to if it was a left-handed guitar. Like McCartney, being forced to adapt right-handed instruments with left-handed playing led in part to the sound that Hendrix created. And as Jimi developed his career in the UK in the 60s, the stories of these two legendary lefties would be connected. In November 1966, the Jimi Hendrix Experience performed at the Bag o' Nails Music Club in London. The Bag o' Nails was a favourite haunt for musicians in 1960s London. On this particular evening, Eric Clapton, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Jeff Beck, Pete Townsend, Brian Jones, Mick Jagger and Kevin Ayers were in attendance. Ayers described the crowd's reaction as stunned disbelief.
You can do now that you're done.
I remember seeing him down the Bag of Nails first time he played in London.
Really?
Just shambled up on stage and this appeared. Very loud and very beautiful.
We met at the
The Beatles had already started work on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band at this point, finishing recording and releasing it the following year. As they had stopped touring, no one really knew what to expect when the album was released. On the weekend of the release, Paul McCartney and George Harrison attended a gig at London's Savile Theatre that was being headlined by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Little did McCartney know, given that despite Sgt. Pepper's only being released a few days prior, that Hendrix and the Experience group would kick the night off with his own rendition of the album's opening self-titled track.
After we'd recorded it, we got all the artwork together and we released it on a Friday night. He used to release in London. And Brian Epstein had this place called the Savile Theatre where he used to have shows on a Sunday night. And he'd have people like Chuck Berry, great people, you know, so we'd always go along to see them. There was nothing else happening on a Sunday night. And this Sunday, after the Friday that Pepper was released, Jimi Hendrix was due to play. So, like, you know, I was a good friend of Jimmy's and a really major fan of his because he was just like a bolt from the blue, you know, amongst guitarists. And I used to go to all his gigs, you know, because he was just there in London. We were like 10 minutes away, you know, so... And so I went down to the Savile that night, and lo and behold, here comes Jimmy, and he opens with Sgt. Pepper, which he only got released on Friday. So you just open with it, you know, it's just like, all right, you know, that was it, man. that was it. That's my favourite sort of memory of that song. I mean, talk about a compliment.
And in this moment, the stories of these two legendary songwriters have become intertwined. So the challenges and environment that you grow up in will shape your songwriting. And we've explored the left-handed link in this video, highlighting two of the greatest musicians of all time. But there is also discussion that these great musicians are actually ambidextrous. Psychologist Stephen Chrisman, who is based at the University of Toledo, has claimed that Hendrix was not strictly left-handed. Although he played his right-handed guitar upside down and used his left hand to throw, comb his hair and hold cigarettes, Hendrix wrote, ate and held the telephone with his right hand. According to Chrisman, he was mixed right-handed, and this mixedness, signalling better interaction between the left and right hemispheres of the guitarist's brain, suffused every part of his music. Chrisman argues that where Hendrix uses his right hand to play an intricate series of bends and slides, while his left hand, in between plucking the strings, uses the pickup selector to switch back and forth between the treble and bass pickups. Many guitarists are left-handed. We've discussed McCartney and Hendrix. You could also look to Kurt Cobain, Mark Knopfler or Tony Iommi, who also had an industrial accident that shaped his playing. But it could be argued that the great guitarists tend to be relatively ambidextrous. Chrisman suggested that this mixed-handedness lends itself to songwriting, in particular bringing together lyrics and melody. Because language and rhythm processing are lateralized to the left side of the brain, while the processing of melody and harmony is lateralized to the right side, the possibility is raised that mixed-handers may have the advantage in integrating the lyrics and melody in songwriting. It could even be argued that Hendrix's favourite chord reflects his neural setup. Dominant 7#9 is neither clearly major nor clearly minor. But simply being mixed-handed doesn't mean you're going to write classic songs. Otherwise, up to 50% of us would be writing number ones. The takeaway from this is that as songwriters we are shaped by who we are and our upbringing, but we can also shape our future, work on our craft and become something else. And you might also have a link to Paul McCartney. Start your own songwriting journey by watching the video on screen now.